இவ்வளவு காலம் வந்து இந்த இயற்கை எவ்வளோ பாதிப்படைஞ்சிருக்கிறது வந்து எங்களோட யாருக்குமே தெரியல. அதனால் வந்து நாங்கள் இயற்கைக்கு இப்போ நிறைய குழப்பங்களை செய்திருக்கிறோம். அதனால் இங்கே வந்து நாங்கள் நிறைய பிரச்சனைகளை அறிஞ்சு அதுக்கான தீர்வுகளையும் கண்டுபிடிச்சிருக்கிறோம். இது வந்து எங்களுக்கு பெரிய ஒரு யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருக்குது.
இதுக்கு அனுசரணை தந்த NDP வங்கிக்கும் நன்றியை கூறிக்கொண்டு நன்றி.
Morning and welcome to another Youth Wing Skills Workshop. I hope you all can hear me nice and loud and clearly. As always, let me begin by thanking our sponsors, NDB Bank, without whose generous financial sponsorship of the Youth Wing, a lot of the work that we do wouldn't be able to be happening. There's a lot happening at the WNPS these days. So as always, I would like to also encourage you to join us in our activities, though we are working virtually mostly currently. You can become a member and this can be done online through the website. There are also a lot of events lined up for this month. Today we have, of course, Dr. Ruchira, and then next Saturday we have a Wild Kids event happening, a trek through nature with Uncle Avi. On Thursday, the 19th, we have our monthly public lecture. So there's a lot happening. So please do join us on all these events and activities. We've also gotten another Youth Wing Skills Workshop confirmed now for the 2nd of September with Sanjay Fernando from Resolve in the United States, who's going to be talking about the use of technology in conservation. And also I would like to encourage you to Instagram post, tweet, and Facebook post about the event today. And remember to tag us, WNPS and the Youth Wing handles. Now let me introduce to you the speaker for today, the exciting, vibrant, and inspiring Dr. Ruchira Somaweera, who is an evolutionary biologist with an interest in how reptiles adapt to a changing world. Ruchira has a PhD from the University of Sydney and is currently the principal environmental scientist at Stantec Australia. He is also a National Geographic Explorer and a scientist of the STEM Professionals in School program of the Australian government, and is actively involved in inspiring the public and the next generation of biologists on wildlife and nature conservation. RU's current research projects have a broad range from landscape-level impact studies in Western Australia to sea snake diversity in the Indian Ocean, crocodile ecology in the remote Australian outback, and reptiles of the Komodo National Park in Indonesia, to snake bites in Sri Lanka, with his work leading to many research publications and 4 books on herpetology. It is a pleasure to have you today, Ruchira, and over to you. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Better? Okay. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Good to see a good participation. And just to flag, so the talk is actually aimed at the youth in Sri Lanka. So I'm going to highlight some of our work that's been done elsewhere, but what's the relevance to Sri Lanka and how we can develop some similar programs in a Sri Lankan context. But the talk in general would be covering topics from around the world, just so that our other international attendees would have an idea about what's going to happen. Is my audio all clear?
Audio is perfect.
Awesome. Let me share my screen and we'll make a start. How's that coming through?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so the talk today would be about the fascinating world of reptiles. More specifically, what me and my team has been doing and how we do it, why we do it, and what's the relevance when it comes to understanding reptiles and conserving them, or like better conserving them. Now, the things that I'm going to present today is not necessarily you'll realize that this is not something I could have done by myself. This is it's a joint effort. It's a joint effort by a lot of people. And I have to thank my family, friends, colleagues, especially my students, my postgraduate students. It's pretty much free labor. They do a lot of work. And also the collaborators from multiple institutes. And also the money. Now, a lot of these things cost money. So I have been lucky to have amazing support from a wide range of supporters, from government departments to NGOs to community departments. So anyway, all these people that I have displayed here, they have supported this work that I'm going to present. Now, my journey started a long time back. If you go 15 years back, that's me as a teenager. I had a liking for things that can hurt me since I was a kid. So like buffaloes, for example, crocodiles that lives in this water. But I have this amazing privilege to grow up in a biodiversity hotspot in the world, Sri Lanka. So I had a lot of things to play with. Now that childhood passion became a hobby as a teenager, and then it became my career. And now actually that's my profession, studying animals and trying to make life better for them. So today's talk will be in chapters, because I have a range of projects happening in different parts of the world, and they have some common themes. So to make it easy to follow, I'm going through some themes. Let's start with aliens versus predators. In other words, studying invasive species. These are species that comes from another place and being introduced either accidentally or by purpose, and having impacts in our ecosystems. Let's go to Northern Australia. Now, this beautiful landscape or remote rugged landscape is Northern Australia. There are many river systems. We call it the outback. If you go into these in these places during late year, so November, December, and if we walk on those banks, you'll hear an interesting sound. Can you hear that sound? Can I get a feedback? Are people getting the sounds?
Yes, we can hear the sound.
Awesome. Okay, so that ew, ew, ew sound, those are baby crocodiles. And they're actually calling from inside the egg. They're about to hatch, and they're calling from underground inside the egg. This is absolutely mesmerizing that these guys are synchronizing. They're telling, okay, I'm going to hatch, be ready to hatch. So they all can hatch together, which has a lot of benefits ecologically. So I have been in love with these guys for almost 13 years now. I did my PhD on Australian freshwater crocodiles and did a postdoc, and have even ongoing projects, and I have students working on them too. So for the last about 13 years, I have been chasing these guys in muddy banks in the Kimberley, jumping on them, doing all kinds of things with them in the hope to better understand its species, so we can have more sound management and conservation actions. Now, this is a common species. That's Bill, by the way, my main field buddy. And this is a common species, and the idea that we normally have is that when a species is common, we know everything about it. This is a good example of how little we know and how wrong we are. So over the years, my work has shown some interesting aspects of their ecology that we never knew. For example, these guys actually, they have this interesting relationship with other top predators, like the freshwater sawfish, also top predators in those ecosystems, how they eat each other in a way. And we know that this is a fish-eating species, but we show that they actually opportunistically take mammals too in here, like they're taking a wallaby. And the babies are being cared for months. You can't actually, I don't think you can see it very clearly, but there's some there's quite a lot of babies hanging around here, and that's the mummy guarding them. So these guys look after their babies for a long time, and we were looking at why they do it and how they do it. There's a population of them, a very unique population that lives inside a cave. And I was looking at how the hell these guys actually adapt to live in a cave, because crocodiles are exothermic. In other words, they need sunlight to power up. So we found that they're actually using geothermal energy. In other words, the heat of water that comes through heated rocks to function as normal. Pretty interesting population. We looked at how other animals are eating crocodiles, because we know that crocodiles eat a lot of things, but also so many other things eat crocodiles. So we were looking at them as prey, and also looking at how good parents these guys are. Now, we had a whole bunch of remote cameras set up, and I got some amazing footage of these guys, not only helping the babies to come out, but gently chewing the egg, getting the babies out and taking them one at a time to water, and then looking after them. So these are many, over the years, we have published close to 20 papers on the ecology of the species, and these are some of the things that I pretty much found very fascinating. While this study was going, a stranger was spreading across Australia, and that's the cane toad. So for those who don't know, there are, in the amphibian world, there are frogs and toads. So in Sinhala, for example, we call Madian Sagemban. So this is a toad. It's not native to Australia. Don't have any native toads. We have loads of frogs, but we don't have any toads. So these guys were introduced to Australia, and they are spreading across northern tropics at a very alarming rate. And they don't come in one or two, they come in hundreds and thousands. So in some remote isolated water holes, this is how it is, the bank. The bank feels like it's actually moving. So I was studying crocodiles in some very unique places like Vinjana Gorge here, beautiful place, and very, these populations are extremely important because they are isolated populations. And when something like cane toads come, that can have significant impact on the crocodiles. Now, the thing is that toads make a toxic, it's called bufatoxins. They have some glands, they have 2 glands on their heads and throughout their body too. And these things make a toxic chemical called bufatoxins. Because Australia did not have any toads, the predators here are not adapted, evolutionary adapted to cope with cane toad toxins. So when they eat them, they die. So freshwater crocodiles are actually being in risk from cane toad poisoning. So when they mouth, meaning that they don't have to even eat it, they just have to chew it, they can get intoxicated and die. So I launched a project in a very large scale. So just to give an idea, this study area, which is a tiny part of Australia, which is here, is bigger than whole of Sri Lanka. Some of these river systems are longer than Sri Lanka. So to work in such a large area and conduct field work, because these are remote areas, is extremely hard. So I was lucky to have a lot of support from a lot of people, from airboats to all kinds of logistics. So we were studying quite a few things in these populations to understand why certain populations are more affected and some are not. So that included looking at what they are eating. So you can see me stomach flushing a crocodile. That's how you study what they have been eating. Small ones, you can do this, you can scoop it out. Big ones, you have to make them vomit. So you actually fill it with water, massage the tummy and let it vomit. And we were also looking at genetic resistance. We were giving them shots of artificially synthesized toad toxins and seeing how their performance is impacted. And also doing field work to see how many are dying and what classes are dying. Now, in ecological research, doing one-off thing, going and looking at a population gives you some idea, but it's not the complete picture. You need to do it over time to understand what happens from year to year, because something you see in the wild at one time could be just a one-off. It's not the norm. And how we do that, there are many ways to do it. One way of doing it is called mark and recapture studies. So I have one of the longest running mark and recapture studies here in Western Australia. It's pretty much the only one actually on crocodiles at the moment. And every year we catch a whole bunch of crocodiles in this river system. So we have years and years of data now looking at how these guys grow over the years, and how they change in their body mass, how they change where they are caught, because there are different pools, and whether they are moving between them. So this is the kind of research that actually gives a very clear understanding of how animals change over time. You can't get that idea with just one field visit. You can't just go and say, okay, I saw 10 crocodiles, there should be more, so they must be impacted. You don't see that, right? You need to have before studies and after studies. Okay, this is what was before a certain threat came in, and this is how it was after for many years. That's only from that only you can actually get a much sound idea about how things change in the wild. And yeah, by the way, that's how you sex a crocodile. You can feel the penis or the clitoris of a female by just physically touching. And that's a very standard way of sexing a crocodile. So we take a whole bunch of measurements, and yeah, that's when I'm sleeping. So one thing is to say, like, okay, things are getting impacted and things are not looking good. But it's very important we take it to the next level as to, so what are we going to do about it? Right? I see so many research papers ending in saying that, oh, we need more research to understand this, but I don't see that research coming in many aspects. So we try taking it to the next level and to actually to do a management implication. So we studied a whole bunch of crocodiles, how they behave, whether they can learn, right? Whether, okay, one thing is to eat something and die, but if they are given the chance, would they learn to avoid it? That's called taste aversion learning. So what we found out was that, yeah, crocodiles are actually very smart animals. They can learn. And if you get them exposed to cane toads in less toxin levels, so smaller toads, if you get exposed to smaller toads, they don't die. They'll eat it, they'll feel sick, and they learn never to eat that again. And that has a lot of management implications. So there has been quite a few things happening. One is a toad sausage project. Now, this is not necessarily for crocodiles, but for other predators that were impacted by cane toads. The Parks and Wildlife Department and quite a few universities and the lab that I was attached to created a cane toad sausage, which is then actually heli-dropped, so dropped from helicopters in front of the actual cane toad invasion line. So the predators get a dose of a non-lethal, a smaller dose of the cane toad toxins, and they learn, oh, when the actual things come, we should not be eating this. And it has actually proved to be successful in some context, in some landscapes. One of my master students here saying, Abhi, she's very happy about the field car. She actually developed amazing gadget to deploy baits to crocodiles. And we have a paper coming up soon about this. And so as you can see, the crocodiles are coming and taking bait. So it's a bait dispersal system. So the idea is that we give these crocodiles a chance to learn by exposing them to controlled levels of toxins before the actual threat comes. Now, this is the kind of research that actually change management and conservation. Knowledge itself is not enough nowadays. We need to actually come up with innovative ways of solving problems. So here's a good example. Now, talking about crocodiles, it's not just other animals that impact them. Something that you might not know is that even plants can affect them. Now, here's a good example. This is Passiflora fodita. It's called the wild passion fruit. Now, the wild passion fruit grows, it just chock-a-block entire landscapes. As you can see, they grow everywhere, on the trees, on the banks, near the water, and beautiful flower, by the way. They have a thing to grow close to water. So in the mighty rivers that I work in Northern Australia, these plants are actually covering our banks like this. Now, the problem is that, well, there's few problems. Crocodiles need these banks. Crocodiles don't clear up and nest. They need open banks. And this thing is completely covering the banks. The second thing, once the crocodiles lay the eggs, the plants can grow over top of them. Now, in many animals, like in humans included, our sex is determined by genetics. Whether you and I are going to be a boy or a girl is determined by our genetics. In some reptiles, like marine turtles, crocodiles, it's determined by the environmental temperature. The temperature at which the eggs are incubated is going to determine whether it's going to be all boys, all girls, or a mix. Now, this has consequences, because when the temperature changes in a nest by shading from weeds and other stuff, it's going to cause changes in the sex ratio. On top of that, the babies, when they're about to hatch, they now have a huge barrier. As you can see, they can't come through this and actually go to water. So a cover like this is affecting the crocodiles in multiple ways. So on a 3-year project for my postdoc with CSIRO, which is Australia's National Science Institute, I studied these, and we used some pretty amazing technology like LiDAR drones. Now, this drone, which is $250,000 worth, is an amazing toy. So I can fly this. It'll go around. We can automate the whole thing. It'll map where the weeds are, because we wanted to understand how the weeds change over time and where it's covered, how much it's covered. We now have the technology to fly a drone, get a digital landscape map, and it's so accurate and sensitive that we can even calculate the surface area of all the leaves that are covering that area. So using maps like this, we can check how these weeds change over time and where they are covered, how much they are covered. This level of data gathering was not possible before. We can't manually do it. We can't manually see how much of the surface is covered with leaves when there's kilometers of landscape to study. But now we can, with a few button clicks on a powerful computer, we can actually get that information. So these are innovative techniques in studying ecology and actually using some amazing drone technology to do so. I wanted to do something similar in Africa. So I visited, this is the Olfrans River, where the Nile crocodiles are. Got to play with quite a few. They are massive crocodiles, and there are also certain plants are affecting them and doing something similar. They're covering their nesting grounds. So I wanted to do something in Africa, but then COVID hit and everything's on hold, obviously. But on top of using LiDAR, we also wanted to use normal photogrammetry drones. Those are drones that actually take photos, but photogrammetry drones are not just tools to take photos. You can do a lot of science with that. Like seen here, we can actually use them for crocodile surveys, because the accuracy of drones nowadays is so high, you can even measure the size of crocodiles. So these are safer and more efficient ways of studying dangerous animals. The plant crocodile relationship has relevance to Sri Lanka too. If you go to most dry zone river tank systems or reservoirs, you'll notice that most of our rivers, most of our tanks are covered by invasive species, invasive plants. Now, not necessarily even dry zone, like even around Colombo. Now, we don't normally think of the impacts these things have on large predators, but they actually do. Things like crocodiles need sunlight, they need warmth. There are certain temperature regimes that need to sustain them. So I actually had a paper looking at direct and indirect, how vegetation impact crocodiles directly and indirectly. If anyone's interested on reading more about this and designing a project in Sri Lanka, this is a good start point. By the way, if you go to my website, ruchira.somaweera.net, you'll get free copies of all my papers, including what I'm showing, the examples I'm giving today. All right, so that's just a snapshot of what I'm doing when it comes to invasive species and one reptile, right? And we have multiple other projects, but I'm going to this is just a highlight of few things. Now, as I mentioned about the invasive species, our world is changing, and it's changing fast. A huge interest of mine is to understand how reptiles adapt to a changing world. All right. And in that aspect, we have done some work, and I'm going to highlight a couple of projects that we have done in Sri Lanka, because the large crowd on today's talk is from Sri Lanka. Who has been here? Give me some reactions. Cool. All right.
Unfortunately, I think Ruchira, we've kept the audience on mute.
Okay, no, I'm seeing some reactions as in hands. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay, so and oh yeah, some are even messaging. Okay, cool. Someone actually nailed it. So this is Pitavalapatana. This is a part of Knuckles Rainforest. So it's a World Heritage Site. If anyone's not being here from Sri Lanka or elsewhere, make it a priority once traveling is possible. It's a beautiful part of the world. It's a mix of cloud forests and montane forests. And here lives a very cool reptile, this guy, the Tennant's leaf horn lizard. So over and over in our literature and in our conservation assessments, we have mentioned that cardamom plantation, which is a spice that is grown here, is a huge threat for these animals. Now, cardamom needs to be planted in the shade. So locals who are like local farmers around in villages in Knuckles plant it in the forest. As you can, like, these are cardamom plants. It's an understory plant. Now, they don't cut the canopy because it needs shade. So a bunch of us was understanding how cardamom actually impacts, or what kind of habitats do these lizards like. And what we found is that, you know what, pure cardamom plantations, there's very few lizards. Natural forests, which are undisturbed, also have a relatively few, whereas mixed habitats where there's cardamom on the bottom and forest canopy on top has a lot of lizards. Now, this could be due to quite a few reasons. One of the main ones is that cardamoms have flowers, which attracts insects, and which is a natural food type for these lizards. And also it provides more roosting and perching areas because cardamom grows like straight stems. But what it highlights is that, of course, I'm not supporting that we should be planting things in a forest, but we need to understand how things are actually impacting, rather than having this very subjective thought process that whenever we change things, everything's going to go down the track, down to hell, which is not true. A lot of animals adapt in ways to what we call naive ecosystems or change ecosystems and make a living. Nature is more resilient than we think, and understanding how animals adapt and what are the pathways that they're actually impacted is very, very, very important if you want to properly conserve a species, because you need to understand what are the priorities. This was the studying in Knuckles was very memorable. I brought in one of my colleagues, Professor Martin Whiting from Sydney. He's one of the world's leaders when it comes to studying how the color changes in reptiles. He experienced leeches for the first time. As you can see, he's like in a bloodbath. And we met Raja, who's, I love this, avoid fat, be healthy. And he was selling wade. Beautiful culture. I absolutely love working there. With Martin, we also looked at how these guys change color with habitat change and with these exposures. So for the first time, we actually ran a UV UV spectrum study on lizards in Sri Lanka. And what it tells is that it gives an idea of, it allows us to understand how other lizards see lizards. It's one thing how we see lizards, but reptiles see in different spectrums. So we were checking whether, based on the habitat they live, have they adapted to change their colors and how they communicate. And that work has been published. You can read more about it. But all what this shows is that, you know what, when things change, some animals are managed to change. So we need to understand what are these pathways. If you go a bit further high up in Sri Lanka, you come to Horton Plains and Nuwara area, which is like the highest tablelands in Sri Lanka, another beautiful part of the world. There you have another invasive plant called Ulex, which is this plant with the yellow flower. And you have an endemic, another lizard, which is the black cheek lizard, Calotus nigrolabis. So over the years, we have been telling that Ulex need to be removed if we want, because it's an invasive species and it's damaging our ecosystems. Of course, it needs to be controlled and removed because it doesn't belong there. However, we need to understand how we can do that with the least damage to components in our natural system. The problem with Nuwara and our higher tablelands is that there are a lot of crows. Because human dumping and garbaging, everything has created a lot of feeding opportunities. We have a lot of crows. So when we looked at it, we saw that there are a lot of crows in disturbed areas compared to undisturbed areas. And wherever there's a disturbed area, you see more of these lizards in these plants compared to the undisturbed areas. Now, this is obvious because crows eat these lizards, and they have found a new way of getting protected from one invasive species by using another invasive species. Sorry, crows are not invasive, by the way. They are opportunistic. They're native, but they are opportunistic. So they're in unnatural numbers. Now, we also saw that, okay, it's not just the crows. They're actually maybe finding other benefits of that. And what we saw is that once we remove the flowers of these plants, the number of lizards that occupy the bushes go down too. All right. So if it is just the crows, it doesn't matter whether it's flowering or not. They would be just happy, but it's not the case. So what this shows is that some changes play an ecological role. When there's an invasive species or any change in the environment, sometimes some animals are benefited from that. So if we are rectifying that, if we are correcting that, it's very important that we understand those roles and make pathways or make things in place so those ecological roles are actually taken care of. Just haphazardly removing Ulex is going to expose a whole bunch of animals to other exposures. So we need to replace those habitats with another suitable native plant or some other means of cover. So that's where ecology plays a role, and that's why we need to pay more attention to these kind of studies, understanding the intricacies, the finer details of these relationships. If you come back to Perth, we have some amazing lizards around here who are very well adapted to coexist with humans. Now I'm not feeding that thing. I was having a pizza in my favorite beach, and this thing crawled over my friend who was next to me, came into our beach tent and started tug-of-warring my pizza. So that shows how bold these guys are, right? And this is an extremely disturbed environment. This is a very popular beach, and you have these lizards running around. So I had a PhD student who did an amazing job. He's fighting other guys during daytime and studying skinks when he have a time. He's an MMA player. So Jimmy or James Barr studied the ecology of king skinks, which is the skink that I just showed. So we were looking at how they network with each other. This is called social networking. Social networking in the animal world, and how these networks and anti-predator behaviors change based on different habitats, based on disturbed habitats and undisturbed habitats. And what we see is that these guys are extremely adaptable. They're actually doing an amazing job in making opportunities in these disturbed places. So the unfortunate thing, though, is that not everything that we share, our homes, our backyards, are necessarily safe. So in Australia, you have one of the most venomous snakes in the world, the brown snakes. They are actually aggressive snakes. They They have very high toxicity. The genus is also called Pseudonaja. Pseudo is false, Naja is cobra. As you can see, they actually raise their body and try to make a hood. That's why it's called Pseudonaja. So snake relocation is a common thing in many parts of the world. Whenever there's a snake coming to a house, you get someone to catch it and put it in a safe place. A safe place. We think that animals need pristine wilderness, so we take them to a place in very good thoughts, like we want to save the animals or do so. But very few of us have ever looked into what happens to those animals. Right? We, with the best intentions, we would catch and release an animal in a place away from hurt, away from harm, but there's no follow-up as to what happens to those animals. So a lab that I was attached to, Professor Bill Bateman's lab at Curtin University, did an amazing study. They put some radio trackers on a whole bunch of brown snakes, and they relocated them. They put a whole bunch of them in the same place. So whenever the person calls, they get the snake, put a radio tracker, put them where they were found or very close. And the other ones, they put them in different distances. What you can see here in this graph is these dots are snakes that were released very close to where they were caught, whereas the black ones are animals that were put elsewhere. When you relocate a snake, they go mad. They literally go mad. We found none of the animals that we released far away, the study released far away, survived. Some of them just die from just going mad, like they were continuously trying to go back home. Some of them were subjected to road kills, trying to cross roads and get him back to where they were caught. Now, it's very important to understand that animals have homes too. This idea that animals will survive wherever we release them is a very old idea. It doesn't happen like that. We have enough scientific evidence now to show that reptiles have home ranges. They have homes and they want to go back. It's called homing. And snakes are a good example for that, at least elapids, which are the venomous, like the cobra family. So awareness instead of translocation is what we are highly advising. I know it's not practical all the time. The alternative is the people to kill the snake, but whenever possible, rethink these things. This is what science tells now. This idea about catching an animal and putting it in a wild place and thinking it will survive, that's very old school. It's not the case anymore. We have evidence to show it's not the case anymore. So those of you who are joining today and are snake rescuers or want to save snakes, make sure you reconsider these things. So an animal was caught in a backyard because it wanted to be there. That's the place it decided to. No one dropped it there, right? It decided that that's where I want to live. That's where my food opportunities or whatever the other opportunities are. So rethink what you are doing rather than with the best intentions, rather than just haphazardly putting animals here and there. Right? This is very relevant to crocodiles too. I regularly see media postage from Sri Lanka about massive crocodiles being translocated. By the way, that is a very poor way of restraining that crocodile. You never do things like that. That dislocates their joints. That's not natural. You never see a crocodile moving the legs like that, right? It doesn't have to be like this. So improper catching and translocations have caused quite a few deaths. Most of these crocodiles don't survive, by the way. They go into, especially the large crocodiles, when they're this much stressed when they're handled, they die quite soon. And over through research, we have shown that this is not something that should be done. A good example comes from Queensland, where Mark Reed's group, Steve Irwin was involved in this study. They caught a crocodile. They caught a whole bunch of crocodiles. One was taken about 400 kilometers on the other side of Cape York, released, and this thing made its way back. It swam around the ocean, found the original river system that it was caught, and actually homed. So we there has been a lot of studies now showing that crocodiles have amazing homing behavior. So when you release them, they're extremely stressed. They try to come back, and by doing so, they not only harm themselves, but put a lot of other people in risk because they travel a longer distance now. So in Australia, whenever there's a problem crocodile now, it's been actually either shot or transferred to a park instead of translocating. The context in Australia is a bit different. Our crocodile management program is actually quite advanced, and there's a lot of science showing that our populations are doing extremely well. So it's a different context. But these are things in Sri Lankan context we need to focus on. Haphazardly catching animals and moving them all over the place is not good. It's not good management. No, it's based on any science. A better way of preventing or minimizing the human reptile crocodile conflict is to actually put physical barriers. So a few years ago, Anselm De Silva and myself got a grant from Chicago Zoological Society, and we made some crocodile exclusion enclosures. So the idea is that people who are accessing, by the way, these canal systems in the dry zone have a lot of crocodiles, and people do get attacked by mugger crocodiles. These are freshwater crocodiles. So the idea was to make places for the villagers to actually access water for bathing, for washing, and so on. So unfortunately, some of these were, well, within few days were taken and stolen for metal. But I know that the disaster management units and the military now have constructed quite a few more solid ones, which serves the purpose. So physical enclosures, physical exclusion is a much effective way. We are also developing other techniques to detect crocodiles. Now, there was some recent work from one of my colleagues, Matt Bryan's team from Queensland. This is something we did a couple of years ago. Now, just to give you an idea, these are ways of detecting crocodiles in places that we were not able to do so. And the ultimate idea is to develop some form of a warning system if a crocodile is close by, to warn people who are accessing water. Here, Lauren is, so here, this pond has some crocodiles. We know that they're there. This pole has two cameras in it. One is a normal camera, the one you are seeing here. And this is what it will show. How do I play this? So, how do I get rid of? Okay. So here you go. So that's the normal camera. As you can see, it's blurry as you can't see anything. You won't see something till it bumps into you, right? That's this dirty, murky water. You have no idea what's under there. But it also have another special camera, which is a sonar. And this is what the sonar shows. Oh. Oops. This is what the sonar shows. As you can see, these are 3 crocodiles within 1.5 meters. So there are 3 crocodiles just here that we had no idea, right? You can see them moving in these sonars. So the idea is that we can use sonar technology now. It has been tested recently, and we are so far still from making it a warning system, but there's a few groups working on them. So these are another innovative ways of minimizing damage and coexisting with wildlife. But when you coexist with things, you need to use them, right? You can't study, and you can't actually you can't save a species without utilizing them. And that comes to our next part of the story, why we should be using animals if you want to save them. I have had a chance of working in quite a few places in Southeast Asia where a lot of reptiles are being consumed, are being eaten, right? This is in Vietnam, quite a few parts of Vietnam, harvesting water snakes is quite popular. If you go to a normal Sunday market or a weekend market, you'll see a lot of vendors selling water snakes. You get tubs of them all kinds of homalapsid and natricids. These are different groups of water snakes. So I was studying them for a while, and we went with the fishermen and we did market surveys and realized that, you know what, these things have been harvested for centuries now, generations, and they're still going. There's no long-term data for most of these systems to show how they have coped or what they are doing, but these are necessary things. You can't just stop these happenings. These are livelihoods, these are customs, these are traditions. So it's very important that we understand these kind of relationships too, because conservation is not just like, no one can touch it, it's mine, or it's protected, or fining people who are violating. You need to find these balances, and studying social systems like this shed light on some aspects. We were also studying the snake wine industry, and this is next level when it comes to how many snakes are being used, and these are from just few markets. As you can see, there's thousands of snakes being used in a single day of surveying, and so the long-term sustainability of these are yet to be studied, but yeah, another interesting aspect of studying herpetology. If you come back to Sri Lanka, we have a similar situation with the file snakes. We call it Madagoya or Redinaya in Sinhala. And I think this is the biggest bycatch of reptiles in Sri Lanka. In one day in Kalpitia, we counted 76 of these guys in local fishing nets, most of them dead. So this is a study that I would really want to actually get going. And if any of you are interested in studying this and have some ideas of how to make use of this, so the idea is to also get some ecological information about the snakes, but also come up with better ways of minimizing this bycatch. I'm very keen to discuss. Sometimes what we see is not necessarily what it is. A good example is I was with some colleagues in US a couple of years ago. We were looking for particular reptiles, and we came across with a lot of salamanders. And while I was playing with some salamanders, a bunch of guys came, they flipped some rocks, got a whole bunch of salamanders into a bucket and just went. And my colleagues mentioned, oh, they're going fishing. You can actually catch salamanders and use them as bait in fishing. Now imagine this in many countries, like using native frogs and amphibians as bait. But in US, there has been enough studies and enough population estimates to show that, you know what, you can actually use some of these animals sustainably for recreational purposes. So this is how far some places have gone when it comes to understanding, okay, these are the population numbers, we are doing good, we can use them. When it comes to Australia, the best example for that comes with crocodiles. Not that long ago, till about 1970, we used to shoot every crocodile that come across. So for leather mostly. So to the level that crocodiles went almost extinct in some places. But the government did an amazing job of not only banning the hunting, but also putting crocodiles in farms and providing the world leather demand using captive crocodiles. So there are farms in Australia with 10,000 plus crocodiles. Not only they bring in a lot of economic benefits to the country, they also support a lot of conservation programs, and our crocodile numbers in the wild are doing extremely well because we are not taking them from the wild now, right? We have other means of supporting the demand. So jobs to income, national income to actual conservation, these programs play a huge role. I work with a couple of these farms and have got some amazing data that you can't otherwise actually get. The crocodile conservation program in Australia has gone to the level of so successful that the number of crocodiles here seems to be affecting other places like Timor-Leste, for example. So there was some studies recently showing that the numbers in Northern Australia are so good, our crocodiles are moving around and even going into other islands, and they're actually causing problems in another island, Timor-Leste, which is East Timor. I actually went there for another herpetological study, And we found a Sri Lankan restaurant there, out of all places, in Timor-Leste. Coming to an end, like a good avenue that we need, that's certainly worth exploring in Sri Lanka, is ecotourism based on reptiles. There are quite a few systems around the world that have done amazing, sustainable, responsible tourism practices based on reptiles or amphibians. So in Panama, amphibian tourism is huge. Galapagos, the tortoises and the marine iguanas and everything plays a huge role. Australia, Northern Australia, the tourism is hugely, like 90% based on crocodiles. And in Canada, there's the garter snake caves are a huge attraction. So properly done, these are huge avenues for money generation for communities and also to support conservation programs, to make anything that people will conserve only things that they feel valuable. That's the reality of it. You can't just preserve things from rules, right? The local communities need to be a part of that and need to feel a monetary or an economic benefit of why are we doing this? Like, I can rather kill it and eat it, but why should I be preserving it? So it needs some benefits. I started a program in some couple of Indonesian islands, especially Komodo Island in Indonesia, where the famous Komodo dragons are. But it's not only the Komodo dragons. There are some amazing other things like this blue pit viper. The only blue viper in the world lives there. So I have put up over the years, I have put up an amazing team of people. That's our group. We ran workshops with the locals. So these are park rangers, park guides, and a bunch of my mates from here who are scientists. So we did some capacity building, train the people. And now, well, unfortunately, COVID has screwed up the whole thing. But the tourism industry was going really well, very responsibly too. And by doing so, we also managed to actually bring to light what the park has to offer. So before that, no one actually cared about what skinks are there, what geckos are there. But now we have amazing field guide and a poster of every single species that's known to the park, because of generating that interest in tourism and getting the guides and the park rangers and the community involved. I'm going to skip the last part of the talk, which is not necessarily relevant here, but I'm going to go to there. Okay. To wrap up, over the years, I have had the privilege of working in some amazing parts of the world in 5 continents, to see what other places are doing, so to understand how these systems work, and how to better understand how we can implement some of those systems in the programs that we are using. Sri Lanka is full of opportunities when it comes to understanding wildlife, right? Our idea that wildlife is just leopards, bears, and elephants, we need to move way, way ahead of that. I'm very happy to see that there's a growing trend and interest in the youth in studying amphibians and reptiles in Sri Lanka. When I was a teenager there, we had very few resources. There was a handful of people who are interested, but now I see a huge community, which is amazing. What needs to be improved even further is us actually getting that science out, and that's where publishing comes in. Why this is that when we, about 10 years ago, a whole bunch of us, actually 150 scientists from around the world, including myself, did a global review and evaluation of what is the status of the world's reptiles. And we found that for every 5 reptiles, 1 is threatened with extinction. And another one is data deficient, meaning we have no freaking idea about anything. Right? So filling those gaps are extremely important, and that's where ecological knowledge, distribution, ecology, behavior, those knowledges comes in. And I could, if I want to emphasize one thing, that would be to please publish and popularize what you see and what you study. top 10 journals in ecology and behavior and all that won't publish random opportunistic observations. But there are so many other herpetological and regional journals that would do so. So get help from people who can write if you don't have experience in writing. But if you see something cool, if you see an animal that no one has seen before in that particular place, it doesn't have to be new species descriptions. We have a huge trend in describing new species. I think we are among the top in the world when it comes to pumping out new species, but we are quite behind when it comes to understanding what's going on with the existing species. Simultaneously, in the same time, those knowledges needs to be improved too. While we are describing all these new things, we need to understand what's happening with the things that we already know. And that's where ecology, behavior, biogeographic kind of studies play a role. So these are only few of the many examples out there. Herpetological Review is a great journal to publish because they publish very short notes. Please get your stuff out and publish. I was a editor for sub-editor for Herpetological Review in the lizard section, which is one of the biggest sections. I did not receive a single article from Sri Lanka for the year I was doing my duties, where we get over 200 a week submissions from other parts of the world. All right, so we have amazing stuff to write about. Please get your scientific glasses on and try publishing stuff. If not, at least submit to other online platforms. iNaturalist is a really good one. It's amazing platform for scientists to get data, so citizens can contribute and scientists can make use of that, and these can lead to better conservation policy too. Join some of the group. I can see some very active public groups on reptiles and amphibians in Sri Lanka on Facebook. I see them doing some amazing jobs. So contribute to them, and if you need to learn things like, okay, what is this species? Ask it rather than just doing the usual thing of killing it, and learn. Because this kind of attitude change is important. We are living in a changing world, and part of that is to learn to coexisting with animals. And coexisting with animals, especially the dangerous and the venomous ones, require that we better understand them, their needs and what they need, how they need it, and make sure we help them survive in this changing world. I'm Ruchira. These are my contact details. Very happy to, I'm very time poor, by the way, if I'm very honest, but whenever possible, I'll be very happy to help with your sciencey expeditions and inquiries. So feel free to contact me by any of these means. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchira, for that highly informative talk, and the volume and the quality of work you're doing is truly impressive. Just to get the conversation going and started, I know you spoke about the translocation and the home instincts of crocodiles, and these practices don't work. But I think one of the challenges that as scientists we face in Sri Lanka, across the board as well, internationally, is that translating this science into informed and quality decision making. How do we do that? Have you participated in that process? And especially in the Sri Lankan context, how can we do that? Because we have the science, but how can we get the decision makers, the government officials to listen?
Yeah, so I have been not necessarily recently in Sri Lanka. I haven't been living in Sri Lanka for about 15 years now. But in here in Australia, I have been an active participant in some of those practices, and so in a couple of other countries, including Indonesia. Now, one of the biggest problems I see is the language that a lot of scientists talk in, right? So there's some amazing work being done in many parts of the world, but they remain to be just in scientific literature. Most scientists don't have the time or sometimes the ability to take it to the end users in formats, in languages that other people can understand. So that is one loophole that's one bottleneck in our system. So from the scientist side, we need to play a better role we need to take a better interest in actually making sure whatever we do have on-ground implications. And that is to take it to the people that matters in formats that can be understood. So here we have quite a few of us have a huge interest in science communication, which plays a huge role in that. So that could be through social media. If you're doing science, when you publish a paper, make sure you put it out in your social media platforms, in formats, in languages, in systems that a lot of other people can understand. That sometimes policymakers and end users pick those up. I regularly get messages from wildlife rangers and people in the wildlife conservation field, the department in Sri Lanka, about, oh, this is something we didn't know. Like, can you pass on this paper? Can you pass is there more information? What has the other countries done? Right. So part of that is to actually communicate your science in formats that can be understood. The other part comes from the policymakers. Unfortunately, some policymakers in any government is not open to suggestions, right? They have a conservative way that they have been doing it for the last 100 years, and that's the way it is. So part of that is a mindset change from the policymakers or the regulators themselves. There's no one way of making sure that this is how people meet in the middle. I know that some people, I have some amazing colleagues in Sri Lanka who work very closely with the wildlife department there, and making sure that the capacity building and science translation, everything happens in effective ways. So kudos for them. But I think this is something that both parties have to improve in.
Thank you. Just this past week, we had the International Panel on Climate Change's latest report come out, and it had some very hard-hitting and stark statistics. Have you done any work in terms of the impact of climate change, or do you have any insights in terms of what the impact of climate change will be on reptiles? Because I know you spoke about some of the other threats, especially invasives, but climate change is significant.
Yeah. So if anyone has, so people who haven't seen the IPCC report, please have a closer look. For the first time, the report actually translates what things mean to our day-to-day life. For example, so we know that there will be a 1.5 degree increase in the next 20 years. Now, for a lot of people, this doesn't mean anything because on a daily basis, we fluctuate more than that. The night and the day temperatures are more than 1.5. But the report actually tells what does this mean when it comes to your health, when it comes to the populations that live close to water, the water level rising, people that live in high altitudes, what does this mean? It also put some effort into showing that to ecosystems and what happens to other parts of the ecosystem. Personally, I have not worked on anything with climate change. There are a lot of other scientists that do amazing work. There's a lab that I'm attached to here at UWA, Professor Nikki Michel's lab, do some amazing work on how climate change is affecting turtles. We know that certain groups of animals are more at risk from climate change than the others, especially those that live in very high altitudes and or animals that have temperature-dependent sex determination. Remember what I told about the crocodiles, their sex is determined by temperature. But said that, reptiles or any animal also have what's called plasticity. Plasticity is their variation, like they can adapt to certain changes. That's within limits, right? So you have behavioral plasticity. If, for example, if things are getting warmer, some animals can adapt to breed earlier, so they get the more cooler parts, right? So nothing's cut in stone. Like animals adapt to changing conditions. I personally haven't done anything on climate change impacts. That's a completely different field of work. I have been a part of a couple of papers contributing to certain aspects, but I didn't lead those research. But on a more broader scale, please look into the new IPCC report. It was brought to my attention by a good friend of mine, and that's how I actually jumped into it a couple of days ago. And yeah, it's certainly everyone has to think of these things. These are not, we have passed the level that, you know what, my kids will deal with it when the time comes. That time is gone. We need, as individuals, as governments, as organizations, we need to be a part of that.
Very true. So Sri Lanka is also known to have, I know you didn't speak about human snake conflict per se in Sri Lanka, but I know you've worked in this. In Sri Lanka is known to have one of the highest incidence rates when it comes to per capita in terms of snake bites.
Yeah.
Can you give us some insight in terms of what the statistics are like in Sri Lanka, and how can people respond when and if they're faced, unfortunately, in such a scenario?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Sri Lanka, unfortunately, as a country, has one of the highest per capita death rates from snake bites. So per capita means for the population size. Just to give a comparison, Australia has some of the most venomous snakes based on the toxicity levels that we know of. But we lose about 1 to 2 people a year here. 1 to 2 people is what die, and most times they are keepers. They are people who keep snakes and unfortunately have accidents. Compared to that, Sri Lanka, we record an estimated 80,000 bites a year, of which an estimated 400 people die. 400 people a year. That's more than the number of people dying from dengue, right? Now, this is a silent killer. Now, these are estimates, by the way. A lot of these records are not properly kept because the cause of death is recorded differently, or some people just go to the village doctors or die at home, so are not actually in these statistics. So in any means, these are astronomical numbers. Now, last year, I got a grant from National Geographic, and I'll be working with WNSP and a few other groups to develop a program on education-based solution for this to mitigate this problem. If people are aware of certain things, we have been doing this over and over, but I strongly believe we have done it wrong many times. Because if we have done a good job, we would have seen a trend by now. So we are taking some innovative approaches, and we are kind of tweaking how we address this issue. So it's not about, this is how you identify the 5 most venomous snakes in Sri Lanka. When the time comes to getting a snake bite, that does not matter for a lay person. It doesn't matter. People are not going to think, oh, is that a Kunumi Karavala, or is that actual Karavala, right? That is not practical. These are unpractical scenarios that we have been preaching over and over. So we are going to take a more innovative, more naive approach to develop a mass media education program, and part of that is to also try and get a curriculum insertion to the Sri Lankan curriculum, the school curriculum, on how to minimize snake bites and what to do in case of a snake bite. Because if people know how to reduce, how can I reduce my chances of getting bitten, and what exactly to do if I get bitten, that would, one thing, reduce the number of human deaths. The other thing, reduce this hatred we have for snakes, so conserve snakes. And the other thing, we'll save a lot of money to the government, because we spend about $10 million a year importing antivenom and treating snake bites, right? So in all these aspects, we'll benefit. So an education-based solution is what I think is the most effective. And I have discussed this with some of the professionals, top people in this field in Sri Lanka. And we are rolling out a project soon after things get the world change a little bit better.
Thank you. I would also like to encourage the audience to send in your questions into the chat box to me if you have any, and I will be happy to take them and put them across to Ruchira.
So I have actually got a whole bunch of, I'm just getting so many messages. Unfortunately, they are coming in too fast. So I'll just touch base few things. So let me.
'Cause I'm seeing the messages that are coming in here, but I'm sure they're also messaging you directly.
Okay, cool. Okay, so some people have not heard some of the stuff we were talking, so apologies for that. If there's a recording of this, is there a recording?
Yeah, yes, there will be a recording and it will get up on YouTube before the end of today. We will try our
Awesome.
best.
So
And it was
we
also
can-
on Facebook Live.
Awesome. We can share that link. So apologies for that. Technical issues do happen, and we have live streaming and also quite a few people on here. So there was okay. So here's the one. What is the biggest type of crocodile in the world? So depending on who you talk to, there are about 24 to 27 different types of crocodiles in the world. They belong to 3 families. Everything used to be in one family before, Crocodilidae. Now we have Alligatoridae, Gavialidae, and Crocodilidae. So 3 families. The biggest by size is the saltwater crocodile, Crocodilus porosus. The biggest skull recorded of a crocodile is a Malayan gharial. So gharials have bigger skulls than normal crocodiles because they are longirostris, meaning their snouts are much longer. So if you are taking by length of skulls, the biggest skulls in the world are of gharials, false gharials who lives in Southeast Asia, and actual gharials who lives in Nepal and India. I have a note coming out soon about discovering one of the biggest gharial skulls in the world. We found it in the Australian Museum in a box. But when it comes to actual size, like length and the weight, the biggest crocodiles are saltwater crocodiles. So the Gatakimbula, what we get in Sri Lanka too.
So somebody has asked, so what if we do encounter a snake, and if translocation is not an option, what is the best course of action?
Yeah, so it is always going to be a tricky one. Like it's one thing to say that you shouldn't be translocating snakes, but what's the other alternative? So unfortunately, it's one of those cases you have to make a decision. You know what? That snake has always lived there. This is the first time I saw it. In most cases, that's the case. Like if you see a cobra in your backyard, that cobra has been there for years probably, right? So it's not that the cobra happened to be coming there that day. It's just that that's the first time you actually saw it. So I know it's risky especially if you have kids at your home, if you have pets, it's a risk. So it needs to be translocated. What we advise is to translocate close by rather than a completely different environment, although it's pristine, because reptiles for many animals, they're not looking for that pristine. Pristine is a subjective thing that humans think, right? So there's no clear-cut, this is how you should be doing it. But next time when you do it, if it is a non-venomous snake, for example, make it a very close by translocation. At the end of the day, you need to save the animal too. So if the leaving the animal there means that it's going to get killed, then you need to move it. If you see a snake, snakes don't hear. So talking to a snake, that doesn't mean anything because they don't actually hear, and animals don't understand Sinhala, right? So talking to any animal in Sinhala, be it an elephant or anything, is just utterly useless. It's childish. But animals, especially reptiles, are very sensitive to movement. So if you can calm down, so when people say like, if you see a snake, calm down, that's not to like make sure that the snake feels safe. It's so that sudden movements or vibrations actually can agitate animals. If you step back gently, let the snake pass. If you're on a morning walk or in the backyard, chances are it'll just slither away, right? So, and one thing to never ever do is to actually pour kerosene. So bumitel, right? So it's a very common practice in Sri Lanka to pour kerosene on snakes. It's like putting acid on a human. So it'll have a very painful death. It'll actually pretty much melt the skin and muscle layers, and it'll have a very painful death down the track. That's why snakes are so reactive to hydrocarbons. So please don't do that. There's no need to beat the shit out of a snake. You can use a broom or a long stick and try to push it away if it is inside the house. you need to understand that how scared the snake is, right? It's like us seeing a massive giant when a human encounters a snake. So if you are scared, imagine how scared the snake is. So yeah, best thing is to calm down, step back, let it slither away.
Thank you.
There
So
was a question
reptiles are
about-
sadly also very prominent in the. Hello, can you hear me?
So there's a question about which the wild passion fruit that I was talking about, which is it making any particular sex more dominant in the crocodiles? That's a good question. So crocodiles have a male female sex system, meaning that if a temperature is lower than a particular temperature, it's all females. If it is higher than a particular temperature, it's all females again. In the middle, you get a mix. So what we see in these populations are they're all pretty much all females. So all females, it's not necessarily bad because you have more animals to breed, but long term you need more sex mixing. You need more males. Otherwise, population viability won't continue because it's just one male spreading or few males spreading genes.
Yeah, so what I was going to ask you was about the illegal wildlife trade, because you showed those pictures of the snake wine.
Yeah.
So IWT is a problem. We have our lizards, especially in Sri Lanka, traded and used for the pet trade, and especially the rare endemic and newly discovered species. There's a trend that they are being sought after more highly. So what are your thoughts on the trade and breeding them for commercial purposes, and how can we combat this commercial as well as the illegal trade?
Yeah, so illegal trade is unfortunately one of the biggest threats to wildlife around the world, not necessarily for reptiles, but for many other things. There was a very interesting paper coming out a few years back, and I wrote the Sri Lankan section for that, for reptiles. We were looking at the role Europe is playing. So one of the biggest buyers of reptiles around the world is Germany, and we were looking at how reptiles from around the world are actually centralized there. And what you see is that, look, the quantities are bad. So, however, said that, when you think of the bigger picture, there are trades that are massive. So if you go to Southeast Asia, the number of turtles that's being collected is massive. We are talking thousands of turtles, some to the level that some species have almost gone extinct. These are freshwater turtles. We do not see that level of collection in Sri Lanka. To be very honest, what we see is quite minimal in the bigger scheme of things. More reptiles die from crows eating them on a daily basis, right? So we need to, while we have to focus on these threats, we also need to put things in context. Whenever this social media can say anything, right? You need to go, that's where actual science actually is important. So you need to see this in context. We see there has been a growing trend in seeing species like Ceratophora, Lyrocephalus, Cophotis, those things in the international pet trade. Some of those are obviously being collected from Sri Lanka. Some could have been bred elsewhere, because if once you get a pair out, you can breed, and certain European nations are known to breed reptiles very well, like reptiles from other parts of the world. So in the bigger scheme of things, yes, pet trade is a huge threat for some animals, but it's not as we think. So there are bigger threats. When you burn a hyena in Sri Lanka, more animals die from that than what's being collected as pets for certain species. So everything needs to be considered within context and with actual data, rather than, you know what, I saw a Lyrocephalus for sale on Facebook in this particular site, so the species must be threatened. It's not the case. It's hardly the case, right? There are proven cases that it is the case, but I have not seen that level we actually had this chat, a couple of like policymakers in Sri Lanka had a chat recently about this too. And yes, it is certainly something that we need to be focused on and paying attention, but again, everything within context.
Thank you. If you had a chance to film a BBC-style wildlife sequence in Asia, what species would you feature and why?
Oh, wow. Okay. Asia has some amazing stuff. Sri Lanka, obviously, it's my birth country. It's home. So if it is Sri Lanka, if we have to highlight a reptile, I would pick the hump-nosed lizard. It is one of the coolest things out there, right? And I don't think we have done enough. So one of my photos of a hump-nosed lizard made it to the IUCN, the international IUCN Red List cover, and has been shared so many times by CITES since, which is awesome. And since I noticed that on social media, people have been talking, oh, what a cool lizard. But I think we can do more for Lyrocephalus. In Asia in general has amazing stuff. So in Borneo, which I absolutely love working in, there's a very little known, very rare snake, lizard called the earless dragon. I was lucky to see one during my last trip there, and it's something that I really want to work on at some point. If you go to Southeast Asia, there are snakes, cave racers that lives their entire life inside cave systems. These are snakes that lives in caves. Another amazing thing that I want to study. So Asia is full of things that I really want to jump into, but if it is Sri Lanka, if I want to pick one thing, I would pick the hump-nosed lizard.
Another interesting question that's coming is the cobra, the two species of krait, the Russell's viper and the saw-scaled viper are unfortunately not protected under Sri Lankan law. Why aren't they protected, and what is your take on advocating for their protection?
Yeah, so my understanding is that they are not listed as protected species because they can cause harm to humans. So the idea is that if you are feeling threatened, I am by no means a expert in policy or law, so I don't know the history of it, but my understanding is that the highly venomous snakes that we consider are not listed. So if you get bitten and if you kill the animal, you are not committing a crime, right? Because some of the older posters, if you looked at some of the old snake bite posters in Sri Lanka, they said Maru Sarpaya Raganena, or other means like kill the snake and bring it so we know what bit you, so we can treat you, right? So it would have contradicted, okay, wow, I'm supposed to get treated because I'm dying, if not, but on the other hand, I'm committing a crime, killing a protected species, right? So I'm not sure about the origin of those rules, but the highly dangerous snakes are not listed. So are some of the economical pests. So Ittava, for example, the porcupines are not listed. So things that can cause damage to lives or livelihoods are not protected, although they are native species. So this whole thing about what are the most venomous snakes, so I'm just going through the questions. There are quite a few questions asking what's the most dangerous, what's the most venomous snake in Sri Lanka. Now I'm going to spill some beans. We are revising, so I wrote a book about Sri Lankan snakes, Sri Lanka in Sarpin, in 2004, and where within this year or early next year, we are releasing the second edition of that. And for that, we have had some very lengthy discussions with some of the top people, especially Professor Anjana Silva, who is one of the top researchers on snake bites and snake venom in the world. We are lucky to have him in Sri Lanka, about how to deal with this. And we have come up with a completely different approach, because this whole thing about these are the 5 most highly venomous snakes, these are the 5 moderately venomous snakes, these are the 10 mildly venomous snakes, is not based on any credible science. So in the book, we are introducing a new approach to look at this, and which is what WHO or WHO, the World Health Organization, Loka Saukya Samvidhana, that's what they are using too. So we are updating the way we look at snakes, we are looking at a more medically important snake category. So what are the snakes that can actually have a medical importance? So that list is different to what we known as the 5 highly venomous snakes, right? So you will see, we'll actually, there has been already some publications about it, but you'll get to know about it very soon.
Great. What would be your best advice for someone who wishes to study herpetology, and how can they cultivate their interest and passion for this field?
Yeah, so, okay, one thing is to, now you have way more resources than we ever had when I was, people senior to me had even less, and my generation had quite a few, only very few, but you now have amazing resources freely available for you to spark your interest and learn. There are good books. My snake book is outdated, but there's a free copy online, which is still the most comprehensive book, unfortunately, on Sri Lankan snakes. Nothing has come complete one yet. There's a recent book, my good friend Kanish Kukuela and Anselm De Silva, they wrote one. That's with regard to snakes. I wrote and Nilu wrote a book on lizards of Sri Lanka, which is outdated and out of print at the moment. However, there are a lot of online resources. There are very active Facebook groups who have very knowledgeable people. So things you can do is join a club. The YZA or the Young Zoologist Association is there. There are other clubs. Most universities have nature clubs, and they organize regular training programs. Join some of the Facebook groups and learn from people who know better. One thing you shouldn't be doing now, look, I am guilty as too. I used to do this. I had a cowboy stage where it's all about, oh, look how cool I am. I can handle a free handler cobra. Look, there's a photo of me holding a Russell's viper. I still see quite a few of those on social media. And to be honest, it's utterly stupid. It's no one's impressed, right? Part of learning something properly is to also understand the risks of it. You are not setting if you are an experienced person who can do that. I learned my lesson hard way, and I have not since done that. And if you want to work with a proper scientist group or a science lab, I can assure you that people would judge you based on what you post, right? So if you are an undergraduate student who wants to do a postgraduate on snakes and want to join an international lab, a lot of my colleagues here, a lot of labs we run here would not take a cowboy because it's such a risk, right? So you need to be sensible. You need to know that what you are doing can give a wrong impression to others who wants to come to that field. So please grow up, be sensible. Like it's showing off, like I can handle a 5-foot cobra by hand is not a huge deal. It's not showing off your manhood, right? There are better ways of showing that. So professionality means a lot in the field. If you want to become a scientist, if you want to become a snake junkie, go around catch stuff, help yourself. But if you want to become a scientist, there's more to that. And part of that is being professional. And being professional means you need to know risks. You need to know how to minimize them. You need to set a good example. Once you have your passion, once you learn what you want to do it very responsibly and keep it to that, because accidents are costly. Quite a few very professional herpetologists have died. International names have died from snake bites and from very silly mistakes sometimes. I have had some near-death experiences, and I learned my lesson the hard way and not since done that. So please don't risk your life for unnecessary social media fame. It's just not worth it.
That's an excellent point, and especially in this age where social media and showing off is such a big thing amongst the youth. That's a very important point. What is the most unforgettable experience in your career? If you had to pick just one, what would that be?
Unforgettable experience is actually I've actually I've thought of this recently, and if I want to pick something, it'll be, I had a huge privilege of holding and working with some tuataras in New Zealand. Now, why this is important is we have about 12,000 reptiles in the world, right? 12,000 reptiles, give or take. All reptiles but one belongs to 3 other groups. So we have 4 orders in reptiles. We have the turtles, which forms one massive order. We have the crocodiles, which forms another order. We have all the lizards, and lizards meaning your geckos, your skinks, your dragons, and snakes. They all makes another one. One reptile is called tuatara. He lives only in New Zealand, forms an order by himself. So to be one, whereas the other 11,999 things belongs to other groups, is so unique. Now that reptile is only lives in New Zealand, but early last year when I was there, I actually had a chance of holding few and working with them, which was amazing. To hold the most unique reptile in the world for any reptile lover is like the pinnacle. That's top. So I have had the privilege of having some unforgettable memories in the wilds of different parts of the world, but the tuataras actually were top.
Fascinating. That's amazing. You're such a fantastic communicator, and that is such an important aspect as we spoke about today as well, effectively communicating this science. I think as Sri Lankans, we should be very proud to have you. I want to thank you for joining us today for this wonderful session, conversation, and taking us into the fascinating world of reptiles and sharing your passion for this subject, which is very visible when you speak. So thank you, Ruchira, for joining us.
Thanks, and also I need to highlight that, look, I have 109 other messages that have come through. Unfortunately, time is a limitation, and I hope some of you got inspired to take a scientific look at reptiles and other animals. And if we have inspired you to do more ecology, to look more closely at things and help preserve animals in a changing world, I think we have done our job today. So thank you again, and thank you for WNSP for organizing this and having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you to everyone who joined the session as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.